help you with that Sour Cream Donut? When Al and I were first married, we lived in Northfield. And we lived behind shopping center.
Mhm.
And there was a little donut shop there in Northfield at the time.
Mhm.
And they had the best sour cream donuts.
They just had a really good bakery.
Oh, you
I
were
used to
there?
live in Northfield,
Oh, okay.
Sanger Hills, actually.
Yeah, that little place had,
Mhm.
Not sure where to get spoons.
oh,
Because it's behind a closed
Everybody now
door.
likes George's. You heard of it?
No.
On 91, it's
they're not like.
they're lining up.
Bakery shop.
It's a little donut.
What?
Right by Twinsburg Road in 91. 6 a.m. they line up, man, you'll see it. It's like-
What's the name of it?
George's
George's?
Donuts.
You don't find too many places around that make their own donuts either. A lot of places,
Really?
they just heat them up or they have them brought in.
Yeah.
Or they bring in the frozen dough and they cook them. They may cook them there, but, bake them or whatever you do with them, but fry them. But there's not too many places where they actually make the batter and the donuts anymore.
They don't get that way very often.
Yeah, George's. They're only open till like. Only open till like. So that would be for.
I go to Scotia or some kind of fairgrounds.
Yeah.
Once in a while. I'll bring funny stuff.
Al, would you like some stew?
Sure. There used to be a guy down in Morton Plaza, he had his own donut shop. He'd get there like about 4 in the morning, 3, 4 in the morning, mix up all the dough, the batter rather, and then start doing donuts. Open about 5 or so. But eventually they raised the rate, his rent there so much he couldn't make a profit. So, and then he was competing with Acme, I think, on the other side of the little plaza, and their donuts were fried there, but they were frozen dough that came from wherever Acme gets them. They just bring them in there and fry them up. So, and then undersell him, of course. So,
Tough business.
yeah,
Tough business.
but it was pretty nice. He had the old counter and everything. You come in, sit at the counter, and yeah, it was good.
The donut shop that used to be in Rexville has become some sort of a coffee joint now.
Yeah.
That's sad.
Now there's a place down the road here that sells donuts. I think they call them fresh, but you'll see them dropping the donuts off at about 10 o'clock at night, to be sold the next morning as fresh donuts.
You know about that little bakery shop down in Ghent?
No, by Terry Point, right
Yeah.
down here, just right down.
There's a bakery shop down in Ghent.
Oh yeah, no, that one's
Back
different.
street.
Yeah, back on the
Bake
little
shop?
the back side there. Yeah, the bake shop. They have some good stuff in there.
They're pretty good.
But this little one that has like soups and sandwiches and stuff, they're fresh donuts. I'll oftentimes see the truck in there about 10 or sometimes earlier.
Yeah, it doesn't have a donut under $2, I don't believe. Pretty pricey.
But yeah, down there in Gent, they make their own there.
Do they?
I believe they do, if I remember correctly.
So you hear about Act for America doing something on Monday?
Yeah,
Yeah, he had the guy on his show today.
the guy that wrote this book is going to be online. He was on our program today.
I don't know, I was listening.
Yeah, we were.
Since I'm working during the day, can I listen to your program later or
Yeah.
is it podcast?
Give me just a moment and I will show you how that works.
He's downright scary.
What's that?
You listen to him long enough, and
Who's Jim
you're
Simpson?
not ready to cash it in, you know?
Jim Simpson has a group, I'm trying to think, is he in Tennessee or Florida? Called, I think it's the United West. Basically, they do a lot of work in what's called the Red-Green Alliance,
Red-Green
or
Axis.
Axis, Red-Green Axis. And red, of course, being communism, green being Islam. And there's this uniting between Islam and communism. There's, back during the Cold War, both the East and the West, of course, the East meaning primarily the Soviet Union, and the West meaning us and England primarily, played the Muslims off against each other. For instance, during the 80s, when Afghanistan was going on. You heard all the criticisms. Remember when George W. Bush was in office that we created the Taliban? Well, and Bin Laden. Close, please. There's a lot of truth to that, because what we did was we funded a variety of Muslim groups over there in order to make life difficult for the Russians, for the Soviets.
What was that, Northern Alliance?
Well, that was later. The Northern Alliance was a group of not Taliban, but Afghan chiefs, chieftains, united to fight against the Taliban. But of course, Bin Laden got a lot of experience there with the Taliban in Afghanistan and all. But what we were doing during the 80s, see, Afghanistan was kind of the Soviet Union's Vietnam. They got mired there, and they were doing a lot of nasty things. They were dropping toys, like what would look like a little doll or teddy bear, or a little toy boat or whatever, and they would drop them, and they would have explosives in them, and they would be fused so that when they were picked up, maybe an hour or two later, they would explode. Because the dropping of them, I guess, would set the timer, however it worked. But these things were the idea was that kids would pick these up and carry them back into their village. This is what the Soviets were doing. I don't know that this was much in the media, of course, but they were doing that fairly regularly. And they had another thing that they tried out in Afghanistan where it was a nerve agent that literally froze people in mid-stride. If it hit them within they found people who were like this, just in mid movement. They were just frozen.
For how long?
Well, it killed them. It froze everything. It just locked all your muscles up to whatever position you were in. Like if you were running, your legs locked, your lungs, everything locked, your heart locked. It just froze all of your muscles.
So how did they deploy this thing?
I think that one was probably a gas shell. So they were using those things in Afghanistan, and so this is one of the reasons that we supplied the Taliban with surface-to-air missiles and some clandestine training and everything, because then they're shooting Soviet choppers down out of the air and harassing the Soviet troops and all that. And what it did is it bled the Soviet Union financially. They were desperate to bring a land link down from the Soviet Union because they had Kazakhstan, which is now independent of the Soviet. When the Soviet Union broke up, the various socialist, remember, it was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Russia dominated it, but some of the republics like the Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, Belarus, places like that, as well as Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Georgia, and places like that, they all went independent. And there's been attempts of various types by Russia to try and exercise control and reestablish some control over those countries. But Kazakhstan, they had, I think, comes down and touches partly Afghanistan or through Azerbaijan and places like that, comes down in through there. And they were using that so they would get, within reach of the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf, because they wanted that ability, because the Soviets had very little in the way of warm water ports. Most of their big ports were all in the North Pacific and North Atlantic and the Arctic Ocean because of
Vladivostok.
yeah.
That one there's
That's up on the north.
Yep.
And the Arctic.
that's where all the ships.
Their
that they
submarine and stuff come out of there. Yeah, because
sent. Well, actually, that's their graveyard.
yeah. What was that?
Wasn't that near Korea?
I was thinking it was a little more in the middle. I would have to look that up. I can't remember exactly where. But so, we poured a lot of money into Afghanistan ourselves because there was several things going on. I mean, the Star Wars program, the Strategic Defense Initiative. In many ways, thank you. We actually made the Soviets think we were further along than what we really were. And so they were kind of panicky over it, because if you remember from the time, there was a lot of effort in our media to get us to pull back from that. The reason for that is the Soviet Union, through the KGB, was spending a lot of money influencing Western media, because the Soviets were trying to keep up with what they thought we were doing with the Strategic Defense Initiative, and they weren't able to do it. And so that was costing them. Afghanistan was costing them. Eventually, of course, the Soviet Union sort of went bankrupt. They ran out of money. They just were having a lot of problems. And, we kind of purposely bled them in order to end the Cold War and cause the Soviet Union to break up. Getting to the stuff with Afghanistan, back to that, when the Cold War ended, we just kind of turned away, and the Soviets, of course, they had been funding various Muslim groups, the Palestinian Authority, they were Hamas, Hezbollah, Muslim Brotherhood, all these groups were getting monies from the Soviet Union. They were being trained in the same camps where all kinds of terrorist groups were being trained at. The Basque separatists, the Red October faction, Matter Meinhof gang, the Irish Republican Army. They were all going basically to the same summer camps. And the Soviet Union was, through the KGB, funding all these different groups. So when the Cold War ended, the Soviet Union broke up, and they were no longer kind of keeping their hand on these groups, and we didn't need them anymore. And so we kind of took our hands off. Well, see, they were it's like having two pit bulls that we had on a leash. And so when we let go of them, they started attacking everything in sight. And well, then that's what happened. That's why there was some validity to, we created bin Laden, we created the Taliban, because there's some element of truth there. And then we let them go when the Soviet Union, Cold War ended. So, but anyway, getting back to the Red-Green Alliance, the Russians, through the GRU, which is the successor to the KGB, is attempting to control and use a lot of these Islamic groups again in order to defeat us. It's like another Cold War. It's just not recognized as such. And they basically work with a lot of these groups in order to infiltrate. And when you look at the recent thing with Ilhan Omar and Rashid Tlaib wanting to go to Israel, or as they said it, Palestine. They won't use the word Israel. In fact, Omar, I believe, first thing day she did, when she went into her new office, they had a map. She put a big Post-it note up over the name Israel, wrote Palestine on it, because they refused to recognize Israel. Their Psalm 83, where we have that, we've talked about that before, where it says in Psalm 83, they don't want the name of Israel to be in remembrance. Turn back there. Psalm 83 here, and
That still cracks me up. They said, okay, only you can come here and visit your grandmother. No, I don't want to.
Well, and there's more to that. Just a moment here.
Psalm 83.
Yeah. All right. It says there in verse 4, they have said, "Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may no more or be no more in remembrance." That's exactly the viewpoint of Ilhan Omar and Rashid Tlaib. This is their view. This is the viewpoint of Hamas. This is the viewpoint of Hezbollah. This is the viewpoint of the Muslim Brotherhood. This is the viewpoint of CAIR, the Council of American Islamic Relation. This is their viewpoint. And this is the viewpoint of a lot of people on the left. And so these two congresswomen, they have actively sided with the boycott, divest, and sanction movement. Now, the boycott, divest, and sanction movement is a movement designed to isolate Israel and to boycott any products that come from Israel, boycott any companies that do business with Israel. The divest is to, if you've got any stock in any company that's an Israeli company or does business with Israel, like Caterpillar right up here in Rexville, they're on that list. Can't buy any of their products, can't invest in that company. And then sanction, to bring economic sanctions against Israel. And they believe that Israel's an illegitimate state, and that's why they push this idea. Well, these two congresswomen very publicly state that they agree with this. They've tried to introduce legislation to that effect. They've also been speakers at a variety of conferences that are pushing for this to take place. So Israel has, a few laws. Believe it or not, they have borders, and they determine who's allowed to come into their country. And so they said,
copy what they're
so they said, because you're giving aid and sanction or help to aid and comfort to the enemies of Israel and to this BDS movement, we will not give you a visa. They asked for a visa to come to Palestine. They wouldn't even use the word Israel. So they said, we will not give you a visa under these circumstances. And so, of course, they were all up, this is terrible. See how horrible Israel is, or Palestine. The Jewish people are to Palestine and to Palestinians or whatever. But so Tlaib gets this idea to really make Israel look bad, since her family is there and her grandmother, who's around 90 years old, lives in the West Bank. She says, well, I would like to at least go visit my grandmother. Can I have a humanitarian visa? Because she's elderly. I may never get to see her again. And Israel said, you may have a humanitarian visa if you will not meet with and facilitate this BDS stuff. And she said, "Oh, this is terrible. I'm not going to go." See, they wanted Israel to say no to the humanitarian visa so that they could say, "Look how cruel they are. Not even a humanitarian visa." So that probably wasn't what they expected Israel to do. So now they're all up in the arms because they gave
They just
requirements.
look stupid.
Yeah, so they just look dumb now. Yeah, so I'm not Israel, but Talib does. So, and of course, the left is running with it. See how horrible they are. But both of those two women very publicly say that Israel's an outlaw state. It's not legitimate. They stole the land from the Palestinians, which is not true. And that, there needs to be a state of Palestine there, because that's what it really is, Palestine. So, and of course, Russia kind of likes that too, because they'd like to be allied with them so that they can move in their influence. And of course, that sets the stage, remember, for Ezekiel 38, because what happens in Ezekiel 38, Russia leads a huge confederacy, an alliance to invade Israel. And so certain things have to take place. Psalm 83, as we've talked about here, talks about a battle. And the end of the battle there, when you get down to verse 13, it says, "Oh my God, make them like a wheel, as the stubble before the wind, as the fire burneth the wood, and as the flame setteth the mountains on fire, so persecute them with thy tempest, and make them afraid with thy storm. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek thy name, O Lord. Let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yea, let them be put to shame and perish, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the most high over all the earth." And so that's talking about a time coming when there's going to be some destruction of those nations, or those groups that are listed there, and those various groups that are listed. Let me turn over here a second. We've got, you look a little further up there in verse 5, it says, "For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee," meaning against Israel and this nation. The tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites. Well, that gives us Edom and the Ishmaelites. Their area where they were at is down around in the Sinai Peninsula area, which of course belongs to Egypt right now. The Hagarenes, and the Hagarenes, I think probably you would find them along part of the southern area of Jordan, northern area of Saudi Arabia, right in there. Then we've got Gebel and Ammon and Amalek and the Philistines, the inhabitants of Tyre. Slipping my mind Gebel right at the moment, but Ammon and Ammon's going to give you area that's encompassed by Jordan. I think Gebel does too. Amalek gives us up into Syria and up through that area. The Philistines, the word Philistine there is the same word that's translated in a couple of other locations in the King James Version of the Bible as Palestinians or Palestine. That's where the word Palestine comes from. It comes from Philistine. Remember, the Philistines are not a Semitic people like the Arabs are. The Arab peoples that are calling themselves Palestinians, they're not using an ethnic term. In fact, most of the Arabs that live in Israel today and in the West Bank and in places like that, most of them are of Egyptian and a good number of them are of Turkish and Syrian origins, I think, is the three main sources where they're from. There's a fair number of them that actually their origins have more to do with Albania and up through that area, because during the Ottoman Emperor days, they brought people from Albania down there, Muslims from Albania, down in to work some of the land in that area. But the the Romans in the 2nd century renamed the land Philistia as an insult to the Jews before driving them out completely from the land. Philistia comes from Philistine, and it was I guess you would say anglicized, but this would be before English was what it is today, so that's really not a good term. But it was modified to Philistia or Palestine. So the Philistines and the Palestinians, that's the group. They're descended from Ham. The Arabs are descended from Shem. That's the origins of the groups. So the inhabitants of Tyre, or the Philistines then, that would have been the area of the Gaza Strip. That's where the Philistines lived before the Philistines disappeared. Long before the Romans ever came along, the Philistines were long gone. But that's basically where they lived. They lived in that strip. Remember when Israel went to battle with the Philistines several times, and one of the chief Philistine cities was Gaza. And I remember the bit with the ark, when they took the ark, and they had the situation where they were plagued with bad cases of hemorrhoids. And that was when it says emerods in the Bible, that's what it means. It means hemorrhoids. But Gaza was one of the towns, I think, that was plagued with that. So that gives us where the Philistines live, and or where what would be the Gaza Strip today, which is controlled, of course, by Hamas. And then Tyre was up where the Phoenicians were, and that would be up around Lebanon, up in that area. So, and who's up there? Well, you've got Hezbollah up there, and various ones up in Lebanon that control that are against Israel. So you've got Hezbollah up in Lebanon, you've got Hamas down in the Gaza Strip, and you've got people in parts of Egypt and Jordan and Syria that are all saying, come let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. I mean, that's happening today. And so when these people come in, Asher also is joined with them in verse 8, and that gets us up into Assyria, which takes us up into northern Syria, up into Mesopotamia, not Mesopotamia, but up in towards getting up toward a little bit toward Turkey, the northern part.
Asia Minor.
Yeah, and so as a consequence, there's an attempt there to destroy Israel, and a lot of people believe that this is a battle that's going to take place prior, and I believe too that it's a battle that's going to take place prior to the Ezekiel 38 battle, because the Ezekiel 38 battle, when you get to that one, what you have there,
Israel is weakened.
Yeah, it's weakened, and well, actually, let's go to Isaiah chapter. I'm going there before we get over to Ezekiel. Isaiah chapter 17, I think. Yeah, Isaiah chapter 17. And there's a variety of reasons that we believe that what's being talked about in Psalm 83 is yet future. And then it's even clearer that this is yet future when we read Isaiah chapter 17, verse 1, where it says, "The burden of Damascus, behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap." Now, this has never happened in history. Damascus is one of the oldest continually occupied cities in the world. it's never been destroyed. It's been captured numerous times. Portions of it have been torn up and everything. But Damascus, as a city, has never been taken away from being a city and become a ruinous heap. Well, when we're looking at things in the Bible that are prophesied and they have not yet occurred, it's because they're yet future. So this is yet future, and it also talks about the cities of Aurora are forsaken, and they shall be for flocks which shall lie down, none of shall make them afraid, and I believe that's getting up into some of the areas in Syria. But the other thing that's interesting in verse 3, and we've looked at some of this in the past, he says, the fortress also shall cease from Ephraim. That's getting into Israel. And the kingdom from Damascus. And the remnant of Syria, they shall be the glory of the children of Israel, saith the Lord of hosts. So the kingdom is taken away from Damascus, which is talking about Syria being destroyed, basically. And Ephraim, the fortress also shall cease from Ephraim. So it's looking at the military strength of Israel here being damaged here. In fact, verse 4, it says, and in that day it shall come to pass that the glory of Jacob shall be made thin, and the fatness of his flesh shall wax lean. So this is in contrast. There's a guy that wrote a book on Psalm 83, says that what's going to happen, the Psalm 83 battle takes place, Israel becomes a regional superpower. They're so powerful and so rich that everybody's afraid of them, and that's where they live in peace, dwelling in peace and safety. But the Bible doesn't suggest that. It suggests that these countries around Israel that are identified in Psalm 83 are destroyed, but it also suggests, in this passage here in particular, suggests that Israel is going to be hurt, not destroyed, but hurt. The fatness of his flesh made lean. And it also says in verse 5, it shall be as when the harvestman gathereth the corn and reapeth the ears with his arm. It shall be as he that gathereth the ears in the valley of Rephaim, yet gleaning grapes shall be left in it, as the shaking of an olive tree, 2 or 3 berries in the top of the uttermost bough, 4 or 5 in the outmost fruitful branches thereof, saith the Lord God of Israel. And it gives this impression, when they do the harvest, there's the field full of grain, and they go through and they harvest, and there's just a little bit left. The grain, the stalks are all knocked down, and it's obvious that the field has been overrun. There's just a little bit left. The grapevine, the olive tree, there it is, full of grapes, full of olives. You come in to harvest, and when they're done, it's obvious that somebody's been through there, and there's only a few olives left, a few grapes left. So this suggests that Israel is going to be hurt, but not destroyed, whereas Damascus ceases to be a functioning state. The kingdom's taken away. The city itself is destroyed. There's other things that are talked about there, but again, looking down in the last verse of chapter 17 here, it says, and behold, at eventide trouble, and before the morning he is not. This is the portion of them that spoil us, the lot of them that rob us. And that suggests that Damascus disappears overnight. Well, how would you destroy a country or a city overnight? A major city. Exactly. And they didn't have that capability back then. I mean, they could attack the city and set it on fire, but it took a while. We now have the possibility of seeing Damascus destroyed overnight.
And then also, nuking it would also fit into verse 2, that the animals would go there, but people wouldn't.
Yeah. So, it just, this suggests that there could be some kind of attack on Israel that would cause them to respond with nuclear weapons, at least against Damascus. Ezekiel 29 also tells us that Egypt is destroyed. in Ezekiel chapter 29, and again, what's described here, people try to suggest ways that this has been fulfilled, but it's never been fulfilled in history the way that's laid out in Ezekiel 29, where it says in, let's see, verse number 8, therefore, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will bring a sword upon thee, and cut off man and beast out of thee, and the land of Egypt shall be desolate and waste, and they shall know that I am the Lord, because he hath said, the river is mine, and I have made it. Behold, therefore, I am against thee, and against thy rivers. I will make the land of Egypt utterly waste and desolate, from the tower of Seine even unto the border of Ethiopia. No foot of man shall pass through it, nor foot of beast shall pass through it, neither shall it be inhabited 40 years. And I will make the land of Egypt desolate in the midst of the countries that are desolate, and her cities among the cities that are laid waste shall be desolate 40 years. And I will scatter the Egyptians among the nations, and will disperse them through the countries. Yet thus saith the Lord God, at the end of 40 years, I will gather the Egyptians from the people whither they were scattered, and I will bring again the captivity of Egypt, and will cause them to return unto the land of Pathros, into the land of their habitation, and they shall be there a base kingdom. But basically what he's saying here is Egypt is going to be destroyed in such a fashion that nobody will live there. In fact, the Egyptians have to leave for 40 years. This has not happened in history where essentially the population of Egypt had to relocate for 40 years, and then finally after 40 years comes back. And
That sounds familiar.
it's kind of like the 40 years the Jews wandered in the wilderness.
No, but they went to, Nebuchadnezzar took them away from their place.
Yeah, for 70 years on that one, yeah. Then they brought him back. And there's elsewhere in the scriptures that indicate that after all of this, the Egyptians will worship God, the God of the Bible. Yeah. In fact, there's a description of a highway running from Egypt in the south to Jerusalem, and then all the way up to Assyria in the north. And that Assyria and Egypt and Israel would all be three godly kingdoms. That's going into the millennial reign of Christ, though. But prior to that, we see Egypt being destroyed, which, of course, they were there. The Edom and the Ishmaelites, not the Ishmaelites. Who am I trying to say? From Psalm 83 here. Get it? Yeah, the Ishmaelites. I had it right. For some reason, I thought I had it wrong. But, indicating what would be Egypt. The other thing that's interesting, too, the border in Ezekiel 29, the border of Ethiopia was the upper rapids or cataract of the Nile River. That was the traditional border upstream, which is, going south, of course. The Nile River flowing out of Africa, heading north toward the Gulf of Mexico. And there was this area called the Upper Cataract. That was I'm sorry?
You said Gulf of Mexico.
Did I say Gulf of Mexico? I'm sorry, the Mediterranean, yeah. And the Mediterranean. And Ethiopia was considered everything south of that. The Ethiopia, the Sudan, Eritrea, Djibouti, all of that, it would have been Ethiopia. That was just Ethiopia. Just likewise, everything west of Egypt going along the north coast of Africa was Libya. That would be modern day Libya, Morocco, Tunisia, all of that would be Libya. That kind of pictures.
Some of these, like in particular prophecy, could these happen during the millennial kingdom?
These are things that are going to prior, because when we look at some of these things, I think I see what you're saying with that, to set them up. But these judgments take place, either before or during the tribulation. Because by the time of the tribulation, the judgment on the nations and the world and everything has taken place so that Jesus can come in and institute his reign over the earth. But the Bible does say that he will rule with an iron hand, where nations that refuse to come up and acknowledge him, he'll withhold the rain and things like that. So there is some indication of some things like that taking place. But there's also reason to believe that this would happen prior to the millennial kingdom. In fact, possibly prior to the tribulation period, because of the idea of Egypt being displaced completely. And what this also does is it destroys one of the nations that surround Israel, that you would think would be mentioned in Ezekiel 38, but are not. You see, Syria, being a prominent country or nation, is not mentioned in Ezekiel 38. Egypt was a very prominent nation, is not mentioned in Ezekiel 38. Ethiopia is, and you don't usually see Ethiopia figuring huge in Bible, stories and things. There are some mentions of it, but not like Egypt. So you would think, why would Egypt be left out and Syria be left out? And
Weren't they friendly? They had an Ethiopian eunuch.
yeah,
He was sensitive to the Lord.
Yeah, but Ethiopia today is not necessarily. I mean, well, and parts of it is. Because remember, Ethiopia covered a large area: Sudan, Eritrea, Djibouti, Ethiopia. All of that was the Ethiopia of the Bible. And some of those parts of Ethiopia of the Bible that right now are in, like the Sudan, I think Chad is also included in that. Some of these places, and Somalia is included in that, are under the control of radical Islamist groups that are dedicated to the destruction of Israel. So there are parts of Ethiopia, I think, that are of Ethiopia proper today that are favorably inclined to Israel. In fact, I think it was during the 70s or early 80s, there was a number of Jews that were in Ethiopia that were airlifted to Israel, and they were allowed to leave there. But a variety of Muslim groups control a lot of what would have been the biblical Ethiopia, and they're really right now today working toward, they want to see Israel destroyed. The Somalia, where you have remember they were the pirates that were capturing ships. A lot of Somalia is under the control of warlords. They're Muslim warlords. They themselves hate Israel, and there's some parts of it where you've got groups that are affiliated with Al Qaeda or ISIS or something like that. That they want to destroy Israel. But I was going to say too that the Tower of Sinai that's there, Sinai would be where Aswan is. That would be the Aswan Dam, Lake Nasser, and it's one of the largest earthen dams in the world. I don't think it's the largest, but it's one of the largest. And so we talked about this in the past, speculating what would cause Egypt to be desolate and the population have to actually leave and live somewhere else for 40 years. Well, that suggests, you brought up nukes with Damascus. If you had some area, look at Chernobyl in Russia, that plant that exploded, and they still have people, they don't go there because it was contaminated because of radioactive waste and fallout. And if you had, or if you look at the population of Egypt, 95% or more of the population of Egypt lives in the Nile Valley and out on the Delta. That's where most of their population is. If something happened to the Aswan Dam and caused that to collapse, then it's going to a huge flood of water that's going to pour down the Nile Valley. Now, in and of itself, that would be a major disaster because as it's coming down, it's sweeping up everything in its path. and in a few hours, 2-3 hours, it reaches Cairo. All of the plants along the way, industrial plants, all those chemicals, all the sewage plants and things like that, all that's brought up into there. And so you got this nice toxic, semi-toxic mix already. But what would make the dam collapse? It's an earthen dam. You can't really just blow it up, because take some powerful explosives from within the dam. Well, Israel has nuclear weapons that if they burrowed, say, 100 feet into the dam and several points across the surface of the dam, the front of the dam, and I think we calculated one time or looked at one time, like say 100 megaton, probably 3 of them across the surface of the dam, you would blow the dam open, and clay, which there's a lot of clay in the dam, has an affinity to nuclear fallout, sticks to it. And so you've got all this radioactive mud picking up all those chemicals and sewage and everything like that and going down the Nile Valley. So most of the Nile Valley now looks like it's been the recipient of a massive dirty bomb. They talk about the dirty bombs, just basically spreading radioactive waste in an area, making it more or less uninhabitable. So you can see where the population of Egypt relocates, because the Nile Valley, if it's not currently habitable for 40 years, they have to leave. They can't live there.
They'll get 3-eyed fish.
Yeah. And there's other things that talk about the destruction of areas around what would be Jordan and Iraq today, and not all of Iran, but the western plains going down toward the coast there, which would have been what was that, Amalek, I think it was, not Amalek. Anyway, I'll come to me here hopefully a little bit, but all of these areas are knocked out so that by the time you get to Ezekiel 38, you have the stage set so that in Ezekiel 38, when it says, starting in verse 1, and the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, and the land of Magog, chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and will bring thee forth all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya, with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah, of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. Be thou prepared, and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard after them. Unto them. And so we have these areas. Persia, of course, is Iran. So Iran, even if that one section was destroyed, there's still the bulk of the rest of the country, Persia or Iran. Ethiopia, as I said, was everything south of, I guess if you looked at it today, south of Lake Nasser, Sudan, Ethiopia, Chad, Somalia, Djibouti, Eritrea, all of that along in that area there. There's Libya, everything west of Egypt, but Egypt's not mentioned. It just, some people just said, well, they can't mention everybody. But it seems rather odd that Egypt wouldn't have been mentioned.
Yep.
And it's the same thing when you look up on the north side of Israel. You've got Gomer and Togarmah, as well as Tubal and Meshach and Gog and Magog and all of that. Meshach and Moscow have the same derivation. You're pointing to Russia there, and Tubal, Tublinsk, the Tubal River flows. It drops down from Russia into Kazakhstan and then back up into Russia. That's the same word. The Tublinsk, I think it is. What is that? The capital of is that Georgia, Armenia, so I forget now exactly in there, comes from this word Tubal. So, all those are put in the area of Russia and the central states there, Georgia and Armenia and Azerbaijan, places like that. When you get into Togarmah and Gomer, you're looking at Turkey and going into the Baltic states and possibly even Germany. So it's kind of interesting. The Germans are drawing closer to the Russians in many ways. Germany made a decision to allow Russia to bring in a natural gas pipeline. And Germany's kind of in a position right now that if Russia said, if you don't do what we want you to do, we can close the pipeline this winter and you will get very cold. And so they have to kind of listen to Russia because they're kind of over a barrel. So,
I mean, America offered to ship them liquefied natural gas.
yeah, and we are to a certain place, like Poland, I think, is taking us up on it, for instance.
And Germany could have too,
But they're getting this pipeline and that, and so you can see how all of this is kind of fitting together. And if there's a battle with those countries that are identified in Psalm 83, and like we saw in Isaiah and Ezekiel, those other two passages and all, and these countries are destroyed, that would be a good reason why they're not mentioned here in Ezekiel 33 or 38, because they're essentially they're kind of destroyed. The other thing too, there's some other countries that are mentioned that oppose everything. In verse number 13, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof shall say unto thee, art thou come to take spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, take a great spoil? So they oppose what's going on. Sheba and Dedan, there's a couple of Shebas and Dedans in the Bible, but these appear to be descendants of Abraham, and I'm trying to think where that passage is. But remember, Abraham had, of course, Ishmael with Sarah's handmaid,
Verse 13.
Hagar.
Chapter 38, verse 13.
Yeah, Sheba and Dedan there. Then, of course, he had Jacob with Sarah. But then remember, Sarah, Hagar is sent away with Ishmael. Sarah dies, and he has a third wife, Keturah. And two of the descendants, or two of the children that come from his wife Keturah, are Sheba and Dedan. And they settled in the area, what would largely be like the Arab Emirates and some of those little Yemen, not Yemen, that's a different area. Along the what do I want to say? Yeah, Qatar and places in that area there, along the you got Saudi Arabia down here, and then along the north east coast there. Some of those little countries in there. And you also have some of them settling in parts of what would make up Saudi Arabia and through that area. Tarshish, the merchants of Tarshish, is interesting because you had you had basically the settlement there when Jonah, remember, he was supposed to go to Nineveh, and of course Nineveh is Mosul, which is, if you're here in Israel, you go up over here to Mosul, to the northeast. Instead, he went to the northwest, and to the west, and he got on a boat in the Mediterranean, and he was headed to where? Tarshish. Tarshish was out on the west coast of Spain, and not too far from where the naval base, Rota, is at. It's in that, not too far from there. And so it's there on the Atlantic coast. You know, that's way over here. You know, Nineveh or Mosul is over here. He went in the opposite direction. He went quite a ways, or he was intending to go quite a ways. But, you know, God said, nope, not going to do it. And we all know the story of Noah, or I'm sorry, Jonah, and everything. But Tarshish there was a merchant colony, so that they could, remember David and then Solomon were allied with the King Hiram there in Tyre, and they had ships. The ships of the Phoenicians were known for their shipbuilding and all that. And what they did is they sailed out the Mediterranean and up along the coast there of Spain and Portugal and France. And they had mines where they mined tin and other things in the British Isles. Tin was an important strategic metal because copper is soft, but when you mix tin with it, you get something pretty hard. And we call it bronze today, but in the King James Bible, it uses the word brass because in the 1600s, brass referred to any copper alloy. Now, today we distinguish between different types with brass and bronze. But they had these mines up there where they mined tin, and they didn't want everybody else to know where the tin came from. And there's also evidence that a lot of copper came from the Americas over at the same time. Because, you know, remember the mound builders that we have here, you know, the Native Americans before the Native Americans booted them out. But the earlier Native Americans, in Moundsville, West Virginia, right down here on the Ohio River, just below Charleston, West Virginia, they have copper that was mined in the upper Great Lakes, upper peninsula of Lake Erie, or Lake Erie of Michigan. It comes down through Lake Huron, down through Lake Erie, right down through the Cuyahoga River Valley, over the Portage, which is one of the oldest continually used transportation routes in North America. Portage path now, and to the Tuscarawas River, down the Tuscarawas, I forget what it flows into, and then into the Ohio River. And they also have in Moundsville, West Virginia, in some of the mounds and artifacts that they have, seashells from the Gulf of Mexico, because they had a commerce going from the upper Great Lakes with the Gulf of Mexico, coming right down the Cuyahoga Valley, over Portage Path, down the Tuscarawas, eventually to the Ohio, down the Mississippi, in the Gulf of Mexico. And there's indication that some of that copper was going across the Atlantic.
Well, America was a lot closer to,
Well,
the plates were still drifting apart from the days of Noah.
yeah, but by the time of Noah, they were still a little further apart. But but the other thing too, with what you're saying there, is when you're traveling east-west, you know, along the lines of longitude, it's much easier to navigate than when you're going north-south. And when Columbus, and in Columbus's day, to be honest, most people thought the world was round. There was very few people in Columbus' day that, you know, we all heard the story. Everybody thought the world was flat, and they were afraid to go. They fall off the edge. Well, there really wasn't a lot of truth to that. Although the merchants of Tarshish, the sailors, the Phoenicians and the Hebrew sailors that plied that route, when they came into the Mediterranean, they would tell people, "Oh, don't sail out of the Mediterranean. It's not safe out there. There's sea monsters and, you know, all kinds of outlandish
And the edge of the
stories."
world.
Yeah, edge of the world and all that, because they didn't want people finding their tin mines. But it's interesting, in a mound in Norwalk, Ohio, okay, in the 1800s, they found this little carved stone thing that's called the Moses Decalogue. And you can see it in Coshocton. There's a little museum there. You can actually go there and see it. Exactly, because nobody could understand what it said around there until somebody who was familiar with the Hebrew language and the way the letters were drawn at the time of Noah. not Noah, Solomon and David. In other words, the ancient or the older Hebrew script. This guy knew that, and he looked at it and read it. It was a shortened version, abbreviated version of the Ten Commandments. How'd that get into in Mound Builder's Mound in Newark, Ohio? Well, of course, the professional archaeologist said it's a hoax. It's a hoax, and it's just like down in Moundsville in the museum that they have in Moundsville. They have some what was it? Was it little stone tablets like? Remember when we were down there? Or were they?
It's a tablet that's about this big, and when they were trying to translate it, then people were coming up with all this stuff that didn't make sense until
somebody who recognized the ancient Hebrew alphabet translated it, and it made perfect sense. And of course, the archaeologists say, "Oh no, that's not what it means. It's just a hoax." In fact, we went down there one time, and I asked about him, and I said, "Oh, I heard somebody say something," and he kind of rolled his eyes and was like, the guy that was there at the museum. So he didn't want to talk about it. But it is interesting that we have things that appear to date to the time of Solomon's kingdom when he was sending. Remember, he had the ships of Tarshish. They said that sailed out and be gone for 3 years. Their trip out and back, 3 years they'd be gone. So there's evidence that indicates that the Hebrews and the Phoenicians were sailing east-west across the Atlantic to the New World and bringing back gold and copper and different things. Another evidence of that is when Columbus was looking for navigators for his ships on his trip. Some of the navigators that he talked to said their forefathers used to sail to the west and back, which is another indication. So there's reason to believe.
So that's the Queen Isabella connection right there of Spain, right?
Yeah, where she financed the trip.
Yeah.
And really Columbus's idea was he thought he could get to the Indies faster by going that way, because the other route at the time to go totally by water was to go all the way under Africa and then up under India and under Asia all the way to get to the Orient, to that portion. But he thought he could go west and across. He just didn't think it was going to be as far as it was. And that was one of the reasons that why people would not go that way, is because they didn't imagine that there was the North and South American continents right there in between Europe and Asia. So they thought you couldn't carry enough provisions with you to make the trip. That's why you couldn't survive. And then they bumped in, of course, to the East Indies. They called them East Indies because he thought he was there at first, but then they realized they weren't. Or the West Indies, not East Indies. But getting back to the merchants of Tarshish here. So the merchants of Tarshish, they settled in Spain, Portugal, France, Ireland, England, the British Isles and all that. And then it says the young lions thereof, meaning the young lions, the offspring of the merchants of Tarshish. Well, what countries in the world today are the offsprings of the merchants of Tarshish?
England.
Well, they would be the merchants of Tarshish. United States, Canada, we're offsprings of England and France and the merchants of Tarshish and Spain, Mexico. And so it appears that these countries, and of course they're over there. Again, no mention of Egypt, no mention of Syria, no mention of Ammon or Moab or anything like that, which would be Jordan and Iraq and places like that. And the other thing in Ezekiel 38 is when this group from the north, led by Gog and Magog, which it points to Russia again, says in verse 10, "Thus saith the Lord God, it shall also come to pass that at the same time shall things come into thy mind, and thou shalt think an evil thought." Verse 11, And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates, to take a spoil and to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which have gotten cattle and goods and dwell in the midst of the land. Well, okay, it's a description of Israel, but that's not a description of Israel today, is it? Israel is not a land of unwalled villages. It's not a land that's at rest, that's dwelling safely, having, without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Israel's got, security fences. They've got bars. People who live up along in the area of the Golan Heights, they have blackout curtains and bulletproof windows on the side that faces, Lebanon, and the side that faces Syria because of snipers. You've got the constant attacks over the border from the Gaza Strip. They, just constant efforts to. They just had two guys that came in and did a knife attack on some Israeli policemen, and this is happening constantly. So something has to drastically change in Israel.
Psalm 83.
Exactly. And also when we were there in Isaiah 17, remember, they became weak. So if Israel's attacked by these groups around it,
That's
right?
when the peace treaty comes in effect.
yeah,
And if the peace treaty comes in effect, that Israel is going to get rid of their
mm-hmm.
defenses because they'll have this peace treaty
Uh-huh.
and all the Muslims and that they'll all be put Damascus with Damascus and
Mm-hmm. Well,
they won't have any
yeah,
walls.
well, and let's take it a step further here. That battle in Psalm 83 takes place. Damascus destroyed. Syria is basically destroyed. Basically these countries right around Israel are destroyed. Israel's made weak. If there's if it goes nuclear, and you see a regional nuclear war there, you can see where the world's going to be shocked. I mean, the world economy is going to be on the verge of collapse, and a guy can arise and bring peace on the condition that Israel lays down its nuclear weapons. We never want to see this again. And most of their enemies are destroyed anyways, the immediate ones. So they could easily become the land of unwalled villages, dwelling in peace and safety, guaranteed this peace that the Antichrist signs in Daniel chapter 9, where he has this covenant that, let me turn over there, get the exact language on that. There's been a variety of peace treaties put forward, but in Daniel chapter 9, whatever is put forward, it says that, let's see here, Daniel 9, verse number 27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And these are weeks of years. This is a 7-year period, because there's a prophecy that's given to Daniel here of a series of things that are going to happen. 70 weeks, he says in verse 24, and all of those, 69 of those weeks worth of prophecy has been fulfilled. The last one, the last 7 years, has the last week, the 70th week, 69 weeks of years has been fulfilled up to the time when Jesus entered into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. That's why that was so significant, that they had no excuse for not knowing that he was the Messiah. Because not only did he have to come during the time of the Second Temple, which was destroyed in the year 70 AD, so he had to come before that, and he had to come within a certain time span from the permission to rebuild the walls and everything of Israel, which was given by, what was it, Cyrus or Darius, one of those guys. I think it was Cyrus. And they calculated and worked this out to where the day that Christ came in and rode on the donkey and everybody cried Hosanna, that would have corresponded to verse number 25, where it says, "Know therefore and understand it from the going forth the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, and the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, and the street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself." I don't have all of the mathematics here in front of me to go through it, but basically it works out to Jesus came at the exact time, presented himself as the Messiah in accordance with this, and then he was cut off. And you notice it says in verse 26, "After 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself." He didn't die for his own sins, did he? He died for our sins. He was cut off not for himself, but for us. And at any rate, the last week of years is on hold until the prince of the people that come that destroy the second temple. Because it says, continuing on in verse 26, "And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary." Well, this has got to be the destruction of the second temple, because the second temple was the one that was rebuilt when they came back from the captivity. It was rebuilt during the time of Zechariah and Haggai and Malachi. And remember Zerubbabel and Nehemiah and all of them. And so they rebuilt it. Then it was expanded and renovated by Herod the Great, because he wanted to impress people and impress the Romans with his building skills, impress the Jews with, "Here, look what I'm doing for you." And then Jesus, of course, entered into that temple. Remember, he went up there and he visited it several times. Well, that temple was destroyed in the year 70 by the Romans. So that's where we believe the Antichrist comes out of the Roman Empire, because it says the prince of the people that shall come, meaning a future people that's not in existence when Daniel's getting this, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And that's exactly what the Romans did. So that's why we know the Messiah had to be Jesus, because he had to come before the destruction. So who came before the destruction that entered into Jerusalem and went into the second temple on the day that was prophesied? Well, only Jesus. And then the temple was destroyed shortly after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection and ascension up into heaven. So we have all this. And then, of course, we have this prince confirming the covenant with many for 1 week. And then in the midst of that week, he commands the sacrifice and oblation to cease. And that's probably going to be the point at which he declares himself to be God. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 says he enters into the temple. So if the temple's been destroyed, that means there has to be a third temple. So we're waiting for a third temple to be built. Yes.
In verse 26 there, where it says, "The end thereof shall be with a flood," was that a literal flood that happened in 70?
No, because that's not the, this is the end there shall be with a flood. Well, I don't think that's a flood in that sense. I think it's a flood as in a flood of the enemies coming in. And I think that's looking toward the, possibly toward the Battle of Armageddon, when they're flooded with enemies. Because it says, "And then the end of the war, desolations are determined." And so that war really doesn't take place till the Battle of Armageddon. You know, because also if you look at verse number 24, where it says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people, upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Well, anointing the most holy, of course, that's setting up the millennial reign of Christ, because they're going to anoint the most holy. And so all of these things have to be taking place. And also when you get to chapter 27 there, verse 27, he says, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So the consummation, of course, is going to be the end of all these things that come to, the finale of the tribulation period with the Battle of Armageddon, and then the return of Christ. And then Jesus takes his position as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the most holy, ruling over the world. But let's see my train of thought here. So we have getting back to where we were with Ezekiel 38 and all of that, but we have a series of battles that take place. That Psalm 83 battle, which appears to destroy certain key nations surrounding Israel. The larger Ezekiel 38 battle, which appears, and I say appears because we could be misinterpreting some things here, but it appears to be something that happens after the Psalm 83 battle, where Israel's been reduced to a shadow of its former self and is willing to entrust its safety into somebody, such as the Antichrist, who confirms a covenant. So somebody comes up. It doesn't necessarily say that the Antichrist puts together the peace treaty. It just says he confirms it. And so it could be that somebody in the world now comes together. There's a variety of scenarios that you can work out, but the world would be shocked if there was a regional nuclear battle. That would shock the world, right?
I think that Ezekiel 38 and 39 there, that's going to be the start of the tribulation. That'll be the first four
Yes,
trumpets.
the horsemen, the four horsemen, because what do you see with the four horsemen? In fact, with that in mind, look at the four horsemen. Remember, we had that picture of the four horsewomen when we were joking. They called them the squad, and they were dressed. They had the white head covering, the red jacket, and then the black that AOC was wearing, and then the fourth one had on the tan coat. Yeah,
See,
the four
the
horsemen.
four horsemen's a little different. These are the first four trumpets.
Yeah, but this happens before that, but look at the pattern of the four horsemen. Actually, I'm going to do the four horsemen because that happens first.
Well, see, I believe that already happened. That already happened when Jesus sat down on God's right hand and took the book of Revelation out of his hand.
Well, let's look what happened. Revelation chapter 5. It says in verse number 1, and I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written within and on the backside, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy to open the book and to loose the seals thereof? And no man in heaven or on earth, neither under the earth, was able to open the book, neither to look thereon. And I wept much, because no man was found worthy to open and to read the book, neither to look thereon. And one of the elders saith unto me, weep not, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the book and to loose the 7 seals thereof. And pausing for just a moment, we're looking at things that Jesus told John would be future things, obviously, because the key to Revelation, if you hold your finger there, is Revelation chapter 1, verse 19, where John was instructed to write the things which thou hast seen. And that's the situation there on the island of Patmos, where he's been banished. And the things which basically is covered in chapters 2 and 3. And then he says, and the things which shall be hereafter. And if you notice the beginning of chapter 4 and verse 1, it says, after this I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was as it were of a trumpet talking with me, which said, come up hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter. So now we're in that, the things which must be hereafter, which he was told to write there in 119, things which shall be hereafter, use the same language. So in chapter 5, we have this book, and there's a who can open this, and then the line of the tribe of Judah, 5 verse 5, the root of David hath prevailed to open the book and loose the 7 seals thereof. And I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne and of the 4 beasts, and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb, as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth. And he came and took the book out of the right hand of him that sat upon the throne. And of course, this is Jesus. And when he has this, he says in chapter number 6, and I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard as it were the noise of thunder, one of the 4 beasts saying, come and see. Now, pause there for just a moment, and let's go to chapter 8. Okay, chapter 8. Now, in chapter 6, he opens a seal, something happens. He opens the next seal, something happens. We'll come back to the 4 horsemen in a minute. He opens the next seal, something happens. He opens the next seal, something happens. In chapter 8, it says, and when he had opened the 7th seal, so 6 seals are opened now. When he opens the 7th seal, and he couldn't open the 7th seal before the other 6 are opened, because the book is actually a scroll, because that's what they called a book. They did not have books bound like this back then. A book then was a scroll round up.
They don't have books.
No, a scroll was a book. A scroll was a book. And you wrote on this scroll, and you sealed a portion, and then you continued wrapping it around, and you sealed a portion. A book can be either bound like this, or it can be a scroll. The scroll, when Paul said, bring the books, he was talking about scrolls. So scroll and book is a synonymous term. A scroll was simply a book before they developed the ability to make a loose leaf book. This is much easier to access than a scroll, obviously. That's why when you look at the Torah scrolls in a synagogue, they have 2 posts, and it's wound up on both of them, so you can roll it this way and roll on that side and kind of go back and forth through. Kind of like, remember the old microfilms where you would have the microfilm reader, and you'd sit in the library and you'd put it in on this side here, and you'd run it across here to the other side, and then you had that thing and you rolled back and forth, and you rolled it back and forth, and you had books on microfilm. I remember going through many books on microfilm. So a book is not just, this is a book, a type of book. This is a loose leaf book. You can have a microfilm book today. They didn't have them obviously back then. You have scrolls. They had scrolls. They didn't have these as yet. So you could not access that 7th seal because you had to break the first seal, see what was there, then the next seal. And each time you broke a seal, you got deeper into the scroll. As the books are opened, those seals are broken. And so you reach chapter 8, and it says, and when you'd open the 7th seal. So now all 6, or the previous 6 seals are broken. He opens the 7th seal, and it says there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of the saints upon the golden altar which is before the throne. And the smoke of the incense which came up with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar, and cast it into the earth. There were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. And the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. And it goes on. Now the angels are sounding. All the 7 seals of the book are now open. Now 7 angels sound their trumpets. Okay, then go a little further and into let's see, verse or chapter number. Chapter number 15, I think. Let's see here. I'm getting ahead of myself there. Looking to the sounding of the seventh angel. Because in chapter 16 we get into the vial judgments.
Seven angel doesn't sound to me. Second half of the tribulation.
Yeah, and that's why we know that hasn't happened yet, because the tribulation hasn't occurred yet. So
Chapter
but
11, verse 15 has the seven angels.
there we are. That's what I'm looking for. Chapter 11, verse 15. Okay, so now we've had 6 angels sound. Chapter 11, verse 15, and the 7th angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and shall reign forever and ever. And it talks about a number of things taking place. Then when we get to chapter 15, he says in verse 1, I saw another sign in heaven, great marvelous 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God. And as we drop further down for time's sake, it says in verse 6, and the 7 angels came out of the temple, having the 7 plagues, clothed in pure and white linen, and having their breasts girded with golden girdles. And one of the 4 beasts gave unto the 7 angels 7 golden vials full of the wrath of God, who liveth forever and ever. And the temple was filled with the smoke and from the glory of God and from his power. No man was able to enter into the temple until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. And then as we get into chapter 16, they start pouring out these. So these take place after the 7 trumpets sound. So you have the 7 seals, then the 7 trumpets, then the 7 plagues. But where I was getting at with the seals, and tying this back in with Ezekiel 38, it says in chapter 6 and verse 1, and when the Lamb opened one of the seals, I heard as it were the noise of thunder, one of the 4 beasts saying, come and see. And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. I believe this is the rise of the Antichrist right here,
Okay, you're
bringing
saying
peace.
that seal's not open.
No, because this is all things which must be hereafter.
So you're saying
This is
that
future.
There's no Antichrist, there hasn't been any Antichrist yet?
There's those that have the spirit of Antichrist, but we're talking about the prince of the people that come. The one that in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 enters into the 3rd temple and declares himself to be God, the one that causes the sacrifices and the oblations to cease, the one that the false prophet makes the image to, and this is yet future.
He represents the Antichrist.
Yeah, this is, if you want to say the Antichrist with a capital A, as opposed to Antichrist, which are already in the world with a small a. There's many Antichrists. Anti meaning in place of Christ. Oh yeah, and they're in the world, and the Bible warns us of Antichrist and the spirit of Antichrist. But there's an individual, the prince of the people that come, that destroy the temple, who will come to power, and he will be the world leader that will attempt to reign over the entire world. And then the false prophet comes up alongside of him, and the false prophet builds an image in what is it, Revelation 13, I think it is, and commands that everybody should worship the image and people receive the mark of the beast. But see, he doesn't appear to come to power until Revelation 6, verse 1, under the 1st seal. This guy goes forth, but then the very next thing that happens is the 2nd seal in verse 3, and verse 4 says, and there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth. And so war takes place. I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen, but this could be where the Ezekiel 38 battle comes in. The Antichrist, who is guaranteeing peace to Israel, but then there's elsewhere where he has the world in 10 kingdoms, And there's a variety of groups out there today that have divided the world up into 10 administrative units. If a one world government came into power, there would be these 10 regions with, you know, a head over each one of those regions. And the Bible talks about the Antichrist having, you know, 10 kingdoms, and 3 of them kind of rebel against him. So this may be in Ezekiel 38 that it could be that battle takes place, and he's faced with that challenge to his power because somebody confirms some kind of peace treaty with Israel to where they lay down their weapons and they become a land of unwalled villages, people believing that they're living in peace and safety. So if, and again, I say if that is a reference to when the Antichrist comes on the scene, then Ezekiel 38 battle very well could be this red horse, which brings war, followed by the after effects of war, which was famine and disease and death and things like that in the first 4, what they call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So, but these are things which must be hereafter. So these are yet future events, because the directive to John was very clear, right? Things which thou hast seen, the things which are, and then he goes through the 7 churches, which you can match that up in history to things that are happening in the world today, or have been happening in the past in various characteristics, and certainly the Laodicean characterizes what we're in today. People that think they had need of nothing, but then John is caught up into heaven, and he sees things, spells it out there, the things which must be hereafter, which is directly what he was told to write, the things which must be hereafter. So now we're looking at things which are going to be after the age characterized by these 7 churches, which is what we're in right now. So the catching away of the believers within that, and of course John pictures the catching away of the believers. He's in heaven. Now the action moves to heaven. We see the 7 sealed book, which is, like I said, it's a scroll that's rolled up, sealed with the 7 seals. That's the way they would do it. And then nobody's worthy to open it except for Jesus. And so he comes forward, he takes it, he begins opening the seals. First seals open, some ruler comes out bringing peace to the world. Second seals open, next thing that happens is war. And to me, that corresponds with the confirming the covenant with many in Daniel 9, chapter 9, and it also corresponds to what might cause Israel to lay down their weapons and dwell in peace and safety, because they think, well, we have peace. Our enemies are, not going to bother us. Most of them have been destroyed. The other ones are afraid. The world has come together. Finally, the world is going to protect us, because right now the world, the UN, is not protecting Israel, are they? And they're very much against Israel. So somebody comes along and says, we have peace. Followed immediately by war. Peace in our time, yes. And then followed immediately by war. And that's what we see in Ezekiel 38. They're dwelling in peace. And then all of a sudden there's war. So
We also have to put it to where when all the children of Israel go back home, all of them, it's probably because
they probably want to repopulate the land, because remember, the flesh of Jacob is made lean.
Yep.
So they're going to be repopulating. The Egyptians are going to be scattered. Other places are ruinous heaps. So yeah, it's an interesting setup.
It sure is.
Yeah.
I'm
So
not gonna argue with you.
no, I'm just going by the chronological order of the scripture.
There's a timeline runs through Revelation,
Yeah.
but there's also things that happen in the future,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all set on that timeline.
Mhm.
Things that are described before they happen, and then things that
Mm-hmm.
are after they happen.
Yeah. And that's what he does. He goes through, and then they go back and they review previous things, because when you get to chapter 12, he goes back and through the illustration of the wonder in heaven, the woman clothed with the sun and all that. He goes back and he reviews the nation of Israel and the coming of the Messiah. And so we go back and see that, and then
That's the things that work.
yeah. So but he's going back and reviewing, and then I was going to say, let's see here. When you get into chapter 14, where let's see. Chapter 14, where it says it's talking about the lake of fire. In chapter 14, verse 10, the same shall drink the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever. And they have no rest day nor night who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. So that's looking forward, the lake of fire, the people being cast into the lake of fire. That's looking ahead to after the millennium, the great white throne judgment, where people are cast into the lake of fire. So like I said, there's times where he looks ahead further, times where he looks back, but the general thing of Revelation carried through the unsealing of the seven seals of the book, as that scroll is unwrapped, followed by the seven trumpets that start after the seventh seal, followed by the seven vials that are poured out on the earth. Those carry us through the tribulation period. And see, there's, and you had mentioned the Great Tribulation, which is the second half, which is, as you look at those judgments, the trumpet judgments are more severe than the seal judgments, and the vial judgments are more severe than the trumpet judgments. It gets worse as you go further in the tribulation, especially after the first half. The first half, there's a lot of things that take place, a lot of difficult things, and a lot of suffering that takes place. But the second half is what Jesus said. If it had been any longer, there wouldn't be any life left. It's that severe. And also the Antichrist is empowered to do worse during that time. The access that the devil has to heaven right now is cut off at that time. And the attempt to persecute believers is far greater at that time. The believers who come to Christ during the tribulation, of course, because the believers prior to the tribulation are removed out of the earth and caught up to heaven. So as a consequence, we have a series of events where, as they're talking, they frequently look back at some things, look forward to some things, but all in the context, we're moving steadily through the tribulation period to the millennium. You get to chapter 19, the Battle of Armageddon, the return of Christ with the armies of heaven, then the binding of the devil for 1,000 years in the bottomless pit, the millennial reign of Christ, followed by the great white throne judgment, and then the new heaven, the new earth, the new Jerusalem, all this stuff that takes place yet in the future. So that's the general trend. But like I said, there's things looking forward and back at various times. So that's what makes it confusing and hard to see sometimes. So, and I'm sure all of us, when we get to heaven, will have these duh moments where we go, how come I didn't see that? How did I think this? Why didn't I see that? Because, we're never going to fully understand. In fact, there's 7 thunders that take place that when John's ready to write what happens on them, he's told, no, don't write them. We don't even know what takes place during them.
Well, thunder is usually judgment.
Exactly. Well, it's in the midst of the judgments. You have the seal judgments, the trumpet judgments, and the vial judgments. In the midst, there's the 7 thunder judgments, and we're not even allowed to even guess because we have nothing to even guess. Just that they're judgments. Can't be good, whatever they are, but they're there. And until people who are living through that they'll experience, they'll know what it is, because it's just like, yeah, because they'll be living in it. It's just like we said, there's some people who will know exactly the day that Christ returns. Those people who are living at that time. So they'll obviously know because they're living there at that time. If the rapture took place right now, we would wind up in heaven. We'd say, you know what? I know the day and the hour now. Right now, nobody knows the day nor the hour. We can know the season, and we're probably in the season. That guy I had on the radio said that the UN is currently pouring in tons of money developing the area around Babylon in Iraq. Remember, just south of Baghdad, where Saddam Hussein was trying to build, building hotels, all kinds of stuff, with the goal of relocating the UN and a world government in Babylon. Isn't that interesting? I mean, this is something that's actually happening right now. And, you have the world government called what? Babylon. And the UN is right now building, our tax dollars are building Babylon. Remember, Saddam Hussein was building Babylon. Remember that we had a Marine that came here. He was one of the first wave of Marines in the war on terror. And, they actually had chemical weapons dropped on them, but, the media said they weren't there. But all they know is they started feeling the effects of the nerve agent leaking out of the warheads. And so they put their chem warfare suits on right away. They weren't fused properly. That was, again, part of the ineptitude of the Iraqi army, but they weren't fused. They just leaked.
They were playing it safe.
Yeah.
It was too dangerous to fuse them.
Yeah, so they didn't explode and spray them with nerve agents. I forget what it was. Was it sarin that they think?
Sarin.
I think it might have been sarin. But he said they actually stayed in Babylon for a few days. And they stayed in some of these palatial estates that Saddam Hussein had built up in Babylon. And he actually issued some coins that had his face.
He thought he was
Nebuchadnezzar like he was trying to portray himself as Nebuchadnezzar reborn. And he had his face had Nebuchadnezzar to look like him, and his face in Nebuchadnezzar, and to celebrate the building of Babylon. So it's kind of interesting that.
And he's humble too.
Yeah. He's a lot more humble now. But it is interesting that the UN is pouring, tons of money into Babylon, with that being the site of their we may get our desire to see the UN kicked out of New York City. They want to move to Babylon. Boy, I tell you what, if we got an announcement that they're going to move to Babylon next year, I'd certainly be thinking, boy, we must be close. Then if they started rebuilding a temple in Jerusalem, because got to be a third temple for the Antichrist to go in and order the sacrifices and oblations to cease and declare himself to be God. Got to be there's just a lot of things that fit
I'd love
together.
to see a near-Earth asteroid take out the Dome of the Rock.
Might not take that. It might be an Islamic extremist trying to provoke a war.
But all I'm getting at is that it would be harder to blame the Israelis if it was clearly the hand of God.
Or an earthquake.
Could a sinkhole take it?
Yeah. Well, hey, as much as they're digging underneath the Temple Mount, I suppose that's possible. But a lot of people believe the temple needs to be built on the site of the Dome of the Rock, and there's some argument as to whether it needs to be or not. So a sinkhole or an earthquake, with the Earth opening up, probably wouldn't be as good as the asteroid hitting or an earthquake shaking it and causing it to collapse or some kind of terror attack on it. Because you would want there's a rock outcrop in there that, according to tradition, that was the rock when Abraham, remember, was challenged to take Isaac and to see if he would withhold Isaac from God, if he loved Isaac more than he loved God. God never intended for him to sacrifice Isaac, but he said, sacrifice your son Isaac, to see what he would say. And Abraham expressed his confidence that even if Isaac died, God would bring him back because that's the son of promise. Now, the Muslims changed the story to be Ishmael, not Isaac. They claimed that it was Ishmael. But that rock on the mountain that he went to, they claim is the rock that's in the Dome of the Rock, where, as the Muslims teach, Muhammad came there and he ascended up into heaven to meet Allah from that rock, the same rock. And it's also thought to be the same rock that, remember when David, didn't we talk about this last week? I think the 3 days of pestilence or of disease,
Yes, we did.
remember? And remember he bought the threshing floor of the one guy that was there, and the ox, and the oxen and the yoke and everything, and he sacrificed the oxen, and he did it there on his threshing floor. They believe that's the same location too, where the Dome of the Rock is, because there's this rock outcropping inside of there. And they believe all that took place on that spot, and that's where the Holy of Holies stood, on that spot. So there's other people who argue that the temple could be located alongside of the Dome of the Rock. There's an empty space there that they say could fit there. And then there's another one that I've heard recently that says that that's not even the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is actually off over here.
City of David.
Yeah, and that's where it should be. I'll leave it to people who know more about archaeology in that area than me, but you can make a case for all these different ways as to where it should be, but wherever it should be, it one day will be there. Somehow or another, it will be there. And some people believe that it will get there because God himself will bring it down from heaven and set it there. On that, he could do that.
Yeah.
But there's a group over there right now that's gathering money and materials, and they're making furnishings and everything, and they're ready to rebuild the temple. They believe it could be built in just a very short time, a few months, and they could have it up and
Yeah,
running.
they already had the red heifer that they need.
Well, they're still making sure it's the right one, because other ones that they thought had been the right one, later on as they got a little older, developed off-colored hairs,
Oh,
like a white hair or something like that. And they can't have even a single white,
it's all red.
hair or patch come out on it or something. So we're after 9 o'clock, but when you look at that, there's just so many things we can speculate on. And one day we're going to actually, be able to see how close we were. So
Mirror now, didn't Paul say something about seeing everything?
we see a window darkly, like through a window darkly, like a dirty window, and you're rubbing it, you're trying to look through there. And, you don't see clearly, but then we will see clearly. So, anyway, we're looking forward to that. But anyway, let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, I want to thank you again for the opportunity we have that we can go over some of these things and look at these things. And Lord, we know that we're not always going to have perfect understanding, certainly not this side of heaven. But Lord, I pray that you give us some guidance and some direction, help us to be able to see your hand working in the world around us, Lord. And again, help us to be ready. We know that certainly the only way that we can be ultimately prepared is to know Christ as our Savior, to know that our sins are forgiven, and know that we have a home waiting for us with you. Lord, again, in the meantime, again, help us as we learn these things, that we cannot be overwhelmed or dismayed or any way in that way, but that we might see your hand and have reason to have confidence when we see the world seeming to fall into chaos around us, that we can have confidence knowing that you have a plan and a purpose that eventually will come to pass. And we look forward to that day. But in the meantime, help us to be found faithful, doing the work that you've given us to do. Bless our time now and watch over us as we leave here tonight. Give us safety on the roads. Bless the day tomorrow and the day Sunday for your glory. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Oh, I wanted to mention, if anybody's interested in World War II history, Conneaut has one of the largest World War II reenactments in the world.
D-Day.
No, World War II reenactments, period, in the world is at Conneaut. It's going on right now. And
boats and everything.
yeah, they have the Higgins boats,
Mm-hmm.
and they are going to do the D-Day reenactment tomorrow. Do you remember what time?
I think that,
Early afternoon.
Yeah, well, there's stuff all day, but I
Yeah.
think that the big wave of the
Yeah.
men going is like,
2 o'clock or something like that. But the thing is, the price to get in is easily affordable. It's free. And they have parking at some of the schools in the area. You follow the signs when you get off the highway at Conneaut. And when you park, parking's free. And they have school buses that take you into the event for free. They charge you a lot to get out. No, no, but it's free to get in. And then when you get there, they got food and different things. And of course, they run around with buckets for donations and stuff. And there's all kinds of stuff to buy when you're in there that supports it. But like I said, it's one of the largest World War II reenactments in the world. And tomorrow is their big D-Day invasion reenactment. So, all right.
How do we see your show from today?
I've not uploaded it, but you had asked about that earlier. One way that you can do it, go to whkwradio.com. WHKW Radio.
good night.
Good night. Take care. Good to see you again. Okay, WHKWradio.com. This is something that we've got set up on here now, without having to wait for me to upload it and update my website. You can go to WHKWradio.com. When you get there, there's a blue line at the top that says programs, fan club, deals, events, resources, connect. And if you go to programs, which is the first one on the left, it pops up a menu and it says program guide, sports schedule, podcast, ministry audio, and some other stuff. And you click on podcast. And when you click on podcast, take care. Good night, guys. Take care.
Right.
And you just follow down there. It's alphabetical, I believe. Yeah, it's alphabetical. And there's Live with Pastor Al. You click on Live with Pastor Al. And right now they have up through Sunday on there. And when you click on that, you see my picture with some headphones. And you click on that.
That's last Sunday, but not.
Yeah, this is this past Sunday, yeah. And when you click on it, there it is.
Did you?
It's right there, and you just hit that, and
Last night, Friday, it's outside the garage. Well,
see. So they don't have today's uploaded yet. I need to upload it because I had some people want to do it. Problem that I had on now the other way that you can go is on YouTube.
Everybody forgot the audio on the YouTube clip.
The thing didn't get plugged in. So, and you just on YouTube, you just search for Live with Pastor Al. And there comes up, there's 16 August 19 right there. And you bring that up and you click on it, and that was the YouTube live from today. You can also find,
It doesn't have the sound that can come through.
yeah, the problem is the sound didn't get connected. I thought it was. And so when you're into the program, let it go here. You can't really hear them. You can sort of hear them a little bit, but you can hear me talking.
wow.
So you just see me sitting there listening as they're talking.
Oh, I got plenty of my own.
All right, take care. Yeah, you take care. Good to see you
Take
again.
care, have a good night.
Have a good week, Saturday again, weekend, I guess. Yeah. But I mean, my part of it is good there, but the podcast has the audio. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to get the audio from today's program uploaded, and on this, no, I don't know if I get, well, I'd like to see it tonight. I'm going to append it to the YouTube and say, click here for the full audio.
So it's on the road though.
Carol, do you have to work
Yeah.
tonight?
Heading there now. Walk around.
So, any rate,
I'll get my-
we're gonna go ahead and sign off on the
the
broadcast there as well. We had that going.
Big hole in it, and when I took it off, there was a big section still left on. One hole bolted on where it's just scratched.
Let's see here.
Shot, so I replaced the exhaust manifold. And I had my gas tank to go up the leak, so I took it off and bought one of those kits to reline the gas tank, you know, so I got that all done now. So I'm putting it back together, I should have it running tomorrow. So
You know
anyway,
what your
so,
problem is? You know me. I've never had such bad luck and not I've never had in the last year. I
Yeah.
don't care what I do, it's wrong.
it happens, yeah.
But I rebuilt the,
Oh, sure. I shared this over. I don't see it here. Oh, there it is.
$19,500, and I wasn't happy about that, but we thought.
Yeah.
They quit on the way home. It was fuel tanks. Wasn't leaking down there.
Oh, Maria, you're on your way. I see that. Very good.
Made significant progress since then.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me find my live broadcast. We're going to go ahead and sign out on here. So, any rate,
Then I put screws, the top back on, put screws on it. And then, I worked the gas tank sealant, painted that thing about 3 times, and painted the head, tomahawk. I used it pretty much a gallon.
Have a good night at work, Carol.
Thank you.
yes, good night.
That's what I had. I went, I made a couple trips to Florida with it.
Well, at least you didn't have to do a 12 tonight.
I know, that's a good thing.
Yeah, right, so the new tank was $200, and it was less than $50 for a sealing kit, so I just wanted the sealing kit. So I'm anxious to see how that.
So did you do so many 12s and so many 8s?
Well, I usually, my
Hopefully that will
real
run
schedule is
tomorrow.
2 12s.
But I'm putting